What if I told you that all of the tragedy Remus Lupin experienced in his life was self-inflicted? Hello there, and welcome to today's video. Now, Remus Lupin is one of the most beloved characters found in the story of Harry Potter. From his infection with lycanthropy to teaching at Hogwarts, it does seem like at every turn, Remus Lupin is able to transform every single situation he finds himself in into an opportunity for self-loathing and self-flagellation. Yet, despite his own perceived shortcomings, he remains as one of the few bastions of good found in the series, and shows how one can stand against the hardships life throws at you. In this video, I'll be examining Lupin's strengths, his flaws, his hardships, and his thematic importance to the story of Harry Potter. But before we dive into Lupin's history, let me know where Lupin ranks in your pantheon of Harry Potter characters. Remus Lupin was the only child of the wizard Lyle Lupin and his muggle wife, Hope Howell. Very subtle. Lupin's childhood occurred during Voldemort's first rise to power, and as such, the wizarding world was plagued by, a lot of dark activity. So this led to his father Lyle joining the Department for the Regulation and Control of Magical Creatures, due to his expertise on dark creatures such as boggarts. Unfortunately, this set of circumstances led to Lyle correctly identifying a captured Fenrir Greyback as a werewolf. However, Greyback was pretending to be a muggle tramp, and Lyle's colleagues not only failed to identify Greyback, they actively belittled Lyle, telling him to just stick to boggarts. At this provocation, Lyle really kind of lost his temper and went on a venomous tirade against werewolves, denouncing them as being less than human. To his bad fortune and his continued regret, Greyback overheard him, and when he was let out of the Ministry of Magic, he informed other werewolves of Lyle's words, and resolved to get his revenge. This revenge came in the form of passing on his lycanthropy to Lyle's 4-year-old son, Remus, a condition he would bear for the rest of his life. Staggered by the tragedy that had befallen his son, and remembering the words he had spoken in the ministry, Lyle and Hope resolved to hide their son from the world, fearing that he would be treated like an outcast and shunned for the rest of his life. And this would have an enormous impact on Lupin throughout the rest of his life, but, it also meant that his parents kind of gave up any hope of the young boy ever attending Hogwarts. That is, until Albus Dumbledore arrived in their home and told the couple that he would be quite happy to see their son attend Hogwarts. And, he then devised several security measures for Remus to be able to transform safely once a month. And thus, the Whomping Willow was planted at Hogwarts. While at Hogwarts, Remus was sorted into Gryffindor, where he made friends rather quickly with James Potter and Sirius Black, and then insisted that they add Peter Pettigrew to their group. His delight at having made such cool friends was tempered by his guilt. Not only at, lying to them about where he went once a month, but also because he was too afraid of losing his friends to tell them off for the stupid stunts they would pull and the fights they would get into. In fact, he would later on in his life acknowledge that this was actually the wrong choice, and that he should have done more to rein his friends in. Like the other Marauders, he joined the Order of the Phoenix straight out of school, where tragedy would strike as Voldemort kills James and Lily, due to Wormtail's betrayal. Sirius would then go after Wormtail, who managed to convince the surrounding public that Sirius was guilty and then fake his own death, leading to Sirius's imprisonment in Azkaban. In one night, Lupin lost every single friend he'd ever had, the only people who had ever truly accepted him. It was a dark and honestly quite lonely period for Lupin, who would move constantly and take on low-earning jobs that were just far beneath his pay grade, just to hide his lycanthropy. His fortunes would only begin to turn 12 years later, when Dumbledore visited him again and hired him to be Harry's defense against the dark arts teacher. And right from his first interaction when Lupin gives Harry chocolate after that very first Dementor attack, we see a lot about him as a character, because it's not just good teaching. It's a moment of genuine care from a man who could rarely care for himself. And I mean, that's why fans love him. Not because he's perfect, but because his goodness shines through even when he can't see it himself. But, this relative stability wouldn't last, as honestly, Snape's vindictiveness led to Lupin's lycanthropy becoming public knowledge, and Lupin would take it upon himself to resign in shame. And this is important. It wasn't the parents who demanded he leave. It wasn't even the students. It was Lupin who decided he was unworthy. A year later, Lupin would be called on to once again join the Order of the Phoenix, where he would develop a close bond with one Nymphadora Tonks. The two fell in love, but once again, Lupin's self-loathing would not allow him to acknowledge his feelings for her. And unfortunately, Sirius's death the following year would lead Lupin to distance himself from all those around him and take on more and more dangerous missions for the Order. And it was only Fleur Delacour's declaration of love for a werewolf-mangled Bill Weasley that convinced Remus that he and Tonks could be happy. But this too would not last, as a few weeks after marrying Tonks, Lupin realized she was pregnant and abandoned her in a misguided attempt to keep her and the child safe while avoiding his own problems. He sought out Harry in an attempt to join him on his frankly rather dangerous quest, but much to his surprise, Harry not only refused him, but insulted and berated his one-time teacher for being a coward. Lupin stormed off violently and ended up in the Leaky Cauldron, where he eventually realized that Harry had been right, and resolved to do right by his wife and son, returning to their side and resolving to protect them no matter what, promising to never leave them again. This decision would unfortunately have tragic consequences, as Lupin would return to Hogwarts with his wife one final time in order to participate in the Battle of Hogwarts, where months of inactivity and focusing on protective enchantments, well, it meant that he was rather rusty when it came to dueling. And this would lead to his death at the hands of Anton Dolohov, orphaning his son when his wife was killed in the very same battle. Remus was shaped early on by his parents' fears that he would be ostracized by wizarding communities. And sure, society's prejudice was very real, but he internalized that fear until it became shame. The cruel irony of his life is that he rarely needed others to cast him out. He did it to himself. I mean, this pattern really starts at Hogwarts. He had friends who loved him, but when those friends crossed the line, bullying Snape or showing off recklessly, Lupin stayed silent. Not because he agreed, but because he feared that if he stood up to them, they'd reject him. Even as a boy, his shame at being a werewolf made him passive. He was so desperate for acceptance that he was willing to sacrifice his own moral compass just to keep it. After Hogwarts, this passivity hardened into self-punishment. When he lost James, Lily, Peter, and Sirius all in one night, Lupin didn't seek community. He chose isolation. He spent 12 years in poverty, moving constantly, never putting down roots, because he believed he didn't deserve stability or belonging. Now that wasn't society pushing him away. That was Lupin actively sentencing himself to exile. Even when things began to turn around, this pattern repeated itself. As a professor at Hogwarts, he had Dumbledore's trust, he had his colleagues' respect, and he had the admiration of nearly every single student. He was, without question, the best defense against the dark arts teacher Hogwarts ever had. But the moment Snape exposed his condition, Lupin resigned in shame. He didn't fight for his right to stand amongst equals, a right he'd actually already proven he deserved. His self-image of being a monster blinded him to the reality of who he truly was. And finally, there's Tonks. And this is really the culmination of Lupin's self-loathing. He rejects her love because he cannot believe anyone could ever truly want him. And sure, he frames it as concern for her safety, but really, it's just self-hatred dressed up as nobility. Even after they marry, when Tonks becomes pregnant, he abandons her under the exact same excuse that she'd be better off without him. But in truth, he fled because he couldn't face the idea of being a father, terrified of passing on his curse. It's the cruelest irony of all. Lupin finally stopped running when he returned to Tonks and resolved to protect his family. only for that very decision to lead to his death at Hogwarts. After a lifetime of punishing himself, he fell only once he finally chose to stand up. Lupin offers an often unspoken parallel to Harry. But where they differ is, while Harry's often stigmatized due to his scar and his history with Voldemort, Harry's always able to rise above the noise and stand strong for what he believes in and who he is as a person. While Lupin always surrenders and steps aside, letting the world dictate to him who he is. A different character that Lupin mirrors quite closely, actually, is Snape. Both are defined by shame, both are who they are because of the tragedies of their adolescent life. Both are definitely brilliant wizards, but damaged in very different ways. The difference is that even at his lowest moments, Lupin still chooses kindness. Make him tragic, yes, but admirable all the same. Lycanthropy and Lupin himself also represent anyone in society branded dangerous or other. J.K. Rowling has said that she intended Lupin to be something of a stand-in for those inflicted with HIV, and as such, Lupin works as a metaphor for chronic illness, queerness, mental health stigma, and so much more. Lupin isn't just a tragic character in a fantasy story. He's a mirror for anyone who feels defined by the worst thing that's ever happened to them. His story, his struggle, is one of anyone crushed by stigma and driven by self-rejection, having to learn to rise above. But his ultimate tragedy is that society might have accepted him, but because he never truly accepted himself, he and the audience will never really know. But as stated at the top of this video, what makes Lupin's tragedy unique is that so much of it was self-inflicted. I mean, yes, he was bitten by Greyback, yes, society's prejudice was real, but the true tragedy is how deeply Lupin absorbed that prejudice. Instead of letting others cast him out, he cast himself out. He silenced himself among his friends at school, he abandoned Tonks when she needed him most, and he walked away from Hogwarts when he was one of its best professors. Again and again, Lupin punished himself before anyone else could. And thematically, that's what makes him so powerful. He shows us just how dangerous self-loathing can be, how it can warp love into fear, friendship into silence, and opportunity into exile. Remus Lupin is one of my favorite characters in Harry Potter, and one of the biggest reasons for that is that he reminds us that sometimes the harshest prison is the one we build inside ourselves. And while that makes his story tragic, it's also what makes him one of the most human characters in Harry Potter. But for those of you who watched my previous video on Sirius Black, you'll know that I said he had the most tragic life out of any of the Marauders. And I still believe that's true, because Sirius had everything in life thrown at him, and he did his best to stay afloat. While Remus had some tough times, he often acted as though he was drowning simply to play to his own self-loathing. But let me know what you think. Does Sirius or Lupin have the more tragic life? Has this video changed your mind on Remus Lupin or not? Leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you for watching.